Well, good morning, everyone. Joan Hughes here, President of Council on the Ageing New South Wales. I'm just going to wait for a little bit longer because it's just gone 10:30 your time, and I'll talk about why we've got different time zones this morning. So bear with me to be accurate. But I'm just seeing a few more people are coming in, and then we'll get underway. So just bear with me for a couple of minutes. All right, let's get underway. Hello, everyone out there. Joan Hughes here, President of Council on the Age in New South Wales. It's great to have so many people join us this morning for this very important webinar about the Indigenous voice to Parliament. I get underway by just telling you a little bit about why we're having this webinar. In 2021, as many of you know out there, you fill out surveys for Council on the Age in New South Wales regarding what are the key issues for you in a particular period of time. And in 2021, we had around 8,000 people respond to our survey. And the top three issues were climate change, inclusion of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in our constitution, and homelessness, especially for older women. Of those respondents, nearly 82% said they believed that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people should be recognised in the Australian Constitution. And this now has been backed up by lots of research, a particular study done by Griffith University, in which a majority of Australians support a First Nations voice to Parliament in some form. So our board, the Council on the Age in New South Wales board, we considered all of the issues, especially around the Uluru Statement from the Heart. So some of you who have been joining our webinars now for a few years, we ran a fantastic webinar on the Uluru Statement from the Heart. And as many of you know, that was a call by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people for real and practical change through the establishment of a constitutionally enshrined voice to Parliament. And also there were issues around truth telling, which is very important, as well as treaty making. We've had a few people email us to say we need to make sure that we stay apolitical, and Council on the Age in New South Wales is committed to staying apolitical. What we are committed to doing is to make sure that our members and supporters are informed around a whole lot of issues so that they can become better citizens and better informed people. So we think it's really a good opportunity for all of us to learn more about our history, to understand the issues and needs for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in Australia. And so we're having a session today in this webinar, and we'll also be running another session a little bit later, probably in a few weeks' time in April, with a spokesperson from the No campaign. So let's get underway. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we are all on this morning, and we're on many different lands. I'm actually talking to you from Kangaroo Island. And if any of you have been to Kangaroo Island, it is an exquisite place. Very dry. I've never been here before, but I'm actually on the land of the Carter Pitjantjatjara people. And there's a sad history here. The Carlton people, they once lived here and then they disappeared. because the island was not here. It was actually joined to the mainland, and the rising sea levels, probably around 10,000 years ago, then it was known as COTA Pitch and Git. And the Kangaroo Island is the name for it really means the island of the dead. So the name was used by mainland Aboriginal people, and that's the land that I'm on this morning. So I don't know whether I actually got the right pronunciation, but I did my best. For those of you who don't know anything about Council on the Age in New South Wales, we run a whole lot of programs, but we are very much a policy and advocacy organisation for people over 50 in New South Wales. We work with politicians and policy makers and providers to make sure that the views of older people are not only heard but are acted on. And we run a whole lot of different programs. We're starting a new program which is called Pop-Up Peer Information Hubs, where older people are trained to inform other older people around services and needs and interests in their particular community. So look out for one of those and we'll give you more information as they develop. We also have a program, called I'll Amend New Ideas, and we have many community speakers who are older people who are trained and go out and talk to organisations about a whole range of things to do with ageing. Now, just in terms of what you can do to participate and listen, we want to make sure that everyone can tell us some of the things that are of concern or some questions. And we have a fantastic panelist whom I'll introduce very shortly. And you see at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A panel, so you can ask your own questions at any time by typing them in. And you can also upvote someone else's question if they're asking something that you would like to know. Now, the panelists, as in Mary and Jade, they'll be looking at those questions, and so will I, or those statements, and they'll be answering them in the best way that they can, and or I might be collecting some themes about some of the questions or statements that are coming in. So let's get underway. You've heard enough of me, but I just remind people that last Thursday was the National Close the Gap Day. And COTA New South Wales acknowledges the significant gaps and disadvantages that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people experience in a range of issues such as health, participation in work or economic opportunities and education. And I think to our shame, Australia's people, as in, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, live 20 years less than non-Indigenous older people. And that's something we should always be aware of. That's not good enough. We think that the referendum, and we know now that the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, will be announcing the questions to the referendum this afternoon in Canberra. And we know that the referendum will be in October. Not sure of the exact date. So remember, this webinar is to inform you around a whole lot of issues to do with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and their communities, and what a voice will do to help them in their lives and to achieve the things that they want to for themselves and for their communities. We believe that this is once in a lifetime opportunity to acknowledge and recognise our First Nations people in our Constitution, to advance reconciliation and to improve the lives of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So that's my bit. And you thought that you were going to meet Dean Parkin, but because the Prime Minister is announcing some issues around the referendum this afternoon, Dean has had to shoot off to Canberra. So we have, and I've only just met her this morning, but I'm very, very excited to introduce to you Jade Ritchie. And Jade Ritchie comes from the Northern Territory, and she's working with Dean on the Yes campaign. And I think I'll just get her to introduce herself. I've read her profile. Jade, we're very, very excited to have you here with us today. Just in the 5-10 minutes that we've got to know you this morning, I know that you'll do a wonderful job in explaining to us all the issues that we need to know about in this short period of time. So Jade, tell us a little bit about your background.
Thank you, Joan, and good morning, everybody. I'll acknowledge that I'm calling in from Larrakia country this morning. The land that I live on and grow up my two beautiful children on, work and play on, has been cared for and connected with the Larrakia people for over 60,000 years, and the sovereignty of that land has not been ceded. I'm actually a Gooreng Gooreng woman, so I was brought up on my grandmother's country over near Bundaberg on the east coast. But I made the move to Larrakia country 10 years ago. I was supposed to be here for 3 years, but as Joan and I have discussed this morning, Darwin is one of those places that you either just continue to visit or it really grabs you. And this is now home, at least while I'm bringing the kids up, because they can't handle any weather under 30 degrees after living most of their lives here. So yes, you were meant to see Dean this morning. So I'll give you my quick background so we can catch up and you know who you're talking to. And I have to say, this type of format is really hard for me. I'm a bit of an extrovert and I love engaging with people. So the fact that I can't see any of you is throwing me a little bit. So stay with me. So as I said, I'm a mum of two. I work for a national environmental solutions company called Tellers Holdings, and I'm actually the general manager there. But the board, like a lot of corporates at the moment, have seen not just the value, but I guess the civil duty in getting the information out before we go to referendum. So they've actually given me time to do this campaign, which is really fantastic. So in my day job, I'm traipsing around the countryside trying to remove hazardous waste from country and do some caring for country. And then I've become one of the national spokespeople for the campaign. Prior to jumping into the private sector, I have a 20-year public service career. And I guess that's what I really draw on when I think of the voice and what it will do. And I'll talk more about that later. But I guess for me, I've sat on the side of the table where we've had to design programs, create policy, implement things on the ground as well. And I've done that across the Northern Territory. So the last few years of my public service career was spent in Arnhem Land. So I really come at this from a perspective of the better informed we are, the better informed Australia is, public servants are, and the government, the better we can make decisions, and, you know, particularly fiscal decisions that really affects everybody. If government funding is not going into the right areas because the decisions aren't informed enough, then that affects us all. So I'll park that for now. I will come back to that. But what I'd like to do is just kick off by sharing the Uluru Statement with you, because that really is the foundational document. And for those of you who haven't been following along, this has been quite a long journey. The voice, the Uluru Statement, the voice, all of that is not the work of Labor. We obviously appreciate the current Prime Minister opening up the way to the referendum and allowing that, but I absolutely recognise that COTA is apolitical, and I would say to you that this is an apolitical movement. This is a movement of the people, and this is a journey for all Australians, not owned by any political party. And we saw last night, we actually got bipartisan support for the mechanics of the referendum. So this is far greater than politics. And for me, and for all of you, I would suggest that this is more about getting things right for future generations. You know, I really want to be bringing up my children in a unified nation, and I feel like this is the way forward for that. So I try as much as possible. I know politicians have had a field day with using this as yet another political football at times, but this is far greater than politics. So I will start with the Uluru Statement now. We gathered at the 2017 National Constitution Convention, coming from all points of the southern sky, make this statement from the heart. Our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander tribes were the first sovereign nations of the Australian continent and its adjacent islands, and possessed it under our own laws and customs. According to the reckoning of our culture from creation, according to common law from time immemorial, and according to science more than 60,000 years ago. This sovereignty is a spiritual notion, the ancestral tie between the land, or Mother Nature, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, who were born therefrom, remain attached thereto, and must one day return thither to be united with our ancestors. This link is the basis of the ownership of the soil, or better, of sovereignty. It has never been ceded or extinguished, and it coexists with the sovereignty of the Crown. How could it be otherwise that peoples possessed a land for 60 millennia, and this sacred link disappears from world history in merely the last 200 years? With substantive constitutional change and structural reform, we believe this ancient sovereignty can shine through as a fuller expression of Australia's nationhood. Proportionately, we are the most incarcerated people on the planet. We're not an innately criminal people. Our children are aliened from their families at unprecedented rates. This cannot be because we have no love for them. And our youth languish in detention in obscene numbers when they should be our hope for the future. These dimensions of our crisis tell plainly the structural nature of our problem. This is the torment of our powerlessness. We seek constitutional reforms to empower our people and take a rightful place in our own country. When we have power over our destiny, our children will flourish. They will walk in two worlds, and their culture will be a gift to the country. We call for the establishment of a First Nations voice enshrined in the Constitution. Makarrata is the culmination of our agenda, the coming together after a struggle. It captures our aspirations for a fair and truthful relationship with the people of Australia and a better future for our children based on justice and self-determination. We seek a Makarrata Commission to supervise a process of agreement making between governments and First Nations and truth-telling about our history. In 1967, we were counted. In 2017, we seek to be heard. We leave base camp and start our trek across this vast country. We invite you to walk with us in a movement of the Australian people for a better future. So that's the Uluru Statement. And when it says in 2017, we seek to be heard, that's because in 2017, after 6 months of regional dialogues, over 250 Indigenous leaders converged on Uluru, being the heart of the nation. They met there at the Constitutional Convention. And it was there that the Uluru Statement was created and delivered. It was received by standing acclamation, and it was decided by a majority of leaders that this would be the blueprint forward. And if you break down each of those sections in the statement, it covers, it's a one-page statement, but it covers a lot and it really speaks to me. And every time I read it or recite it, and it's been a number of times now over the last 6 years, there's some standout things, and I just want to unpack them with you a little bit. It means something different to everybody, and I do recommend that after this you go and read it again, because it takes a few times for it to really, for you to unpack the bits that mean the most to you. For me, it's a statement of hope. For me, it really sums up my hope for this nation. As a child going through school, I did come under fire a fair amount. There was a lot of racism that I experienced. And as any other child, you just want to be seen the same. You want to be seen the same as your classmates. So when things were being talked about, like, the arrival of Captain Cook, or, the Frontier Wars, which was only very slightly touched on when I was at school, but there was always this slight disconnect. It was like I had a different history to everybody else in the class, because the way it was told in my home was so different to what the history books were saying. That gap is closing, because more and more the truth telling is coming out, and we're getting the real picture of our history. But I want nothing more than to be united as a country. So the statement really fills me with hope. It does talk about some very heavy issues, like the incarceration rates, the fact that, so in the Northern Territory, on any given day, we have over 1,000 children in out-of-home care. We have some really serious issues that have come out of, generational cycles of trauma. So, the stolen generation, those practices were continued into the 70s and 80s. So, certainly within your lifetimes, some of it was still happening when I was born. So we're seeing generations. We had children that were removed from their parents and brought up in institutions, and you would hear from some of the royal commissions and things that have come out recently about the abuse that was suffered in those institutions. Then you've got that generation who's gone on to be parents without the basic skills and the experience and the role modeling of how to parent. And then you've got the next generation now who are trying to parent without that positive lived experience. And so the cycle continues. So when I read things like that from the statement, it's heavy and it's sad and it's very real. And these are experiences that I've had up in the Northern Territory. But it gives me hope that when it talks about empowering our people, when we talk about being able to share that information and consider that trauma and those cycles and why things are the way they are, when we consider that when we're developing policy and program, there is hope in that. We can do it differently, and we can actually break those cycles by including the people who've had those experiences, in putting them, not just including, but putting them at the forefront of those conversations. The other thing that the statement talks about is Makarrata. Now, that's a Yolngu word, and it does, loosely mean coming together after a struggle. How nice would it be, after hearing all of our history and some of the atrocities that have happened over time and the failed government policy that continues? Makarrata again provides that forward vision for how things can be, that coming back together. So I really feel like, in terms of reconciliation, and we're edging towards another reconciliation week, let's not be satisfied with just doing morning teas and talking about reconciliation. The voice really provides that tangible action for us to reconcile as a nation. I find that very exciting. So I did touch on how we got here. The Uluru Statement is that foundational document. And the big ask there is for us to be, for First Nations people, to be recognised in the Constitution, and to do that by the way in which we want it to be, which is to have a voice to Parliament. Now, the big takeaway here is we're not currently recognised. So that in itself needs to change. That can be to not be included in the Constitution and to not be considered in the rule book that governs this country. It sets out who can do what and to whom. To not be part of that makes it very hard to identify with the nation. And when you're not part of that broader community, it makes it very hard to identify as an individual as well. So that really needs to change. The Constitution was brokered between colonies in 1901, and I won't go into a big history lesson here. I'll assume that most of you are across that. But think about what was happening in 1901. That's not reflective of who we are now. So in 1901, there was not a single First Nations person in any of those rooms that were discussing the Constitution. There was no consideration for how we might all live together in harmony. There was no consideration for that. And there certainly wasn't any recognition that First Nations people had been the custodians of this land for over 60,000 years. As well as that being heartbreaking, it was a real missed opportunity. You know, we are rich with culture. We have the oldest living culture right here in the country where we live, and that is something to be celebrated, but it was completely ignored in 1901. So right now we have the opportunity to modernise our Constitution to reflect who we really are as a nation. There's been no mention in the Constitution of the dispossession as well that was faced. It's been proven over a number of different, over time, the Mabo decision throughout the theory of terra nullius. So, you know, there has been acknowledgement in some courts and some legislation that First Nations people were here and, you know, did exist and lived on this and looked after this country well before settlement. But the Constitution does nothing to indicate that. The reason we have to go to referendum to change the Constitution is simply that is the only way to do it. So I have a lot of conversations about this, and a lot of people just can't believe that we have to go to this much trouble to do something that seems like common sense. It seems quite simple, but the way the Constitution was developed, we can only make these sort of amendments through a referendum. Just quickly, I'll touch on the way a referendum works, and I'm assuming you've all been through a couple of them now. The most successful referendum in our history was the 1967 referendum, which then meant that Indigenous people were counted in the census. Up until then, there was, you know, we could tell how many sheep were in this country, but we had no idea how many First Nations people were in this country. That changed in 67 thanks to a successful referendum. So this year when we go to referendum, we will need a supermajority or double majority, if you like, meaning that a majority of people will need to vote yes, and a majority of states will need to vote yes. So we really need everyone who is registered to vote to come out and vote, to vote yes, so that we have a successful campaign. The main thing I want to say about that, just quickly, there is nothing to lose by voting yes, and a whole lot to gain. By voting yes, we're righting a wrong that has been done not by us. You know, as I said, it was 1901 when this constitution was put together. So we're a different generation here now, trying to modernize something that no longer is reflective of us. So I just like to make that point, that by voting yes, we know that the status quo is not working. You know, you will see some of the issues talked about on the news, but I want to give you a bit more information on what it looks like on the ground. We are seeing such severe homelessness, severe substance abuse issues, you know, overrepresentation in jails and things like that, such mortality rates and the things that are coming out of, or that you can see in the Closing the Gap report. Those things are not improving at a rate that we need them to. So, you know, this is evidence that the status quo, the way we're doing things right now, and even the current government will admit the way things are happening now is not working. So we need to change it. We've got nothing to lose by making this change, but we have a lot to lose if we continue down this track. For me, I now want to just, I've given you sort of the high level notes here, but I would like to talk about what the on the ground impact could look like with the voice. I guess of the questions that I get asked a lot, you know, we've talked about constitution, and there's a lot of papers being written about constitutional experts pulling that side of it apart. You know, there's people looking at the legislation, and there's a whole lot of stuff that we will leave to the experts to advise Parliament on. What I want to share with you is the on the ground impact. So if we look at some of the major issues at the moment, nationally or globally even, we'll say climate change, for instance. Up in the Northern Territory, we have ranger groups. Now, rangers work in two worlds. So rangers generally have a remit from either the Land Council or the government body that they're working for, and they might be told to, you know, keep an eye on if they're sea rangers, it'll be, you know, look at survey dolphin numbers, or if they're inland rangers, they might be looking at reductions of certain species. They'll be doing fire management, pest management, all those kind of things. Those rangers come to those positions with lifetimes of experience. It is part of culture to care for country. And so in a lot of ways, these are roles that are, you know, just intrinsically well suited to people who are still connected to country and are living on that particular country. So when I go out to remote Indigenous communities, there's no one but those traditional owners who understand that land and the climate and everything that plays into that environment better than those people who have been custodians of that land for over 60,000 years. So the rangers are using their cultural knowledge as well as, you know, academic evidence, as well as, you know, the training that they receive on the job. They're bringing all of those worlds together and are the eyes and ears of country. Now, where it can be done even better is if they become the voice of that country as well, because the disconnect has been certain programs and the way they're funded or run and everything fits into a nice little bureaucratic box produced in Canberra, and it comes all the way up the Stuart Highway and down the rocky dirt roads out to a remote community. And that's where the disconnect is. What we see works best is when the rangers actually give the information the other way, send it down to Canberra, and things are designed based on the advice, the good advice and the evidence collected by the rangers on the ground. That's how good policy is formed and good programs are formed, and it works well. We've seen a number of things come out of and I keep saying Canberra, but just as an example, I was one of the public servants that was charged with having to bring policy back and implement it on the ground. And I can tell you it just works better if it's informed by those who it's going to affect. I'll share a story with you when I was in that role. And this is how interesting my days were. So sometimes I'd be in Canberra in a suit, talking to other public servants down there, and then fly back here, get on a very small, very tiny charter plane with my boots and my Cooper on. One day I was flying in the charter plane, and as we were coming into land, we see this helicopter with a bullocky, so like a wild buffalo hanging from a rope from the helicopter. And as it came in, that was actually our lunch being delivered to us. So, quite different to your Uber Eats in the city. But so they landed, and the bullocky was then put into the back of a ute, and it was driven to where we were driven to. So we both landed at the same time, went out to the crocodile farm, and that bullocky was then carved up for our lunch and put straight onto the barbecue. Now, the crocodile farm was an example of where community said what they wanted. So I was working on the economic development side. For years, we'd go out with training programs, and it still happens now, training programs, things that have been decided in Canberra, this will work and we'll throw a heap of money at it. One of the things I experienced, they wanted to do a coffee van in a community. We'll teach everyone how to be baristas. Well, it's not a good news story when that program falls over, but you can sort of understand when you go out on the ground in these communities, a coffee van was probably not the best fit. And I don't know that anyone in that community grew up as a child going, I really want to be a barista when I grow up. So the crocodile farm was something that the community said they wanted. Again, it fit with the cultural knowledge that had been passed down over years and years and years to, work with nature. So the crocodile eggs were harvested in some traditional ways and then some more modern ways. And again, that's an example of that mix of the two worlds coming together successfully. And the eggs are incubated. The crocodiles are grown out to about, say, this big. And then they're sold off to Hermes and other European big fashion houses to be made into fashion. And the meat is used elsewhere as well. So a really great business because it has, it's profitable, but it's work that people want to do, work that people can do in their own communities, and the pride, like the going there that day and the entire community turned out for the opening of the croc farm. So we had the kids come over from the school, the carers were bringing the babies over from the childcare, all the ranger groups were there. There's also a Learning for Country program that gets kids doing their education inside and outside of the classroom, and that's the succession plan for the rangers. They were all there. Everyone in the community wanted to show me and the other guests what they'd achieved as a community. So I just like to use that example to show, that's where you see their success.
Jade, they're great examples. We're going to hand over to Mary very soon, but Jade, before I do, people are asking for those examples, and if you, Jade, can go into the Q&A section, there is a message there from Jeffrey. Can you see that one?
I've heard scaremongering rumours that returning sovereignty to the First Nations people will mean that we will no longer own our homes, etc. What will be the practical outcome of a successful referendum? Jeffrey, thank you for that question, because it does make me aware of what sort of information we need to get out there. So thank you. There is no way that our homes, and I say ours, I own a home, I own a mortgage. We had this, unfortunately, we had these, it's disinformation. We experienced that when the Native Title Act came out as well. We experienced that around 1992 when the Marlborough decision came out. No one's houses got taken during Native Title. The Aura Act has been out since 1976 in the Northern Territory. Nobody's house has been taken because of any of that legislation. That is not what this is about. This is about recognising First Nations people in the Constitution. So non-Aboriginal people are already, like, the whole Constitution is written about them. That doesn't give them power to go and take anybody's houses. It won't give us that either, and that's certainly not what we're after. And a voice to Parliament is about providing advice to government on matters that affect Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. There is nothing in that would allow anyone to take a home. And this is all, the intention around this is equity, and the intention around this is to unify this nature. It's actually the opposite to what that suggests. Do you think?
I think that's
clear?
Yeah, that's a great answer. I think, Jade, that as far as I'm concerned, you've answered that well. Now, Jade, there's also a couple of questions which is about the practical, the practical outcomes of a voice for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And I'll just combine these two questions and then I'll hand over to Mary. But Jade, we'll definitely come back to you later in the webinar, because I know there'll be some more questions that I can filter through to you. But I think this is an important question about, Jade, what do you think for this audience is the most compelling reason to vote yes? So, and then I'll add this other question from Judith, and she says she's had lots of conversations with Indigenous people about independence, self-determination, empowerment, voice, but she still doesn't know how that is going to help reduce all of the issues in Indigenous communities around alcoholism, domestic violence. So maybe those two, what do you think is the most compelling reason to vote yes? And how do you think that the voice is going to help Indigenous people around some of those very complex issues that have had neglect over time?
Mm-hmm. So June, I'll just start right there, in terms of neglect over time. There's been some neglect in that there's cognitive dissonance. If Aboriginal matters don't affect me directly, then I can park it to the side and I don't need to worry about it. There's been that, but there's also been failed government policy. And I feel like, Australians in general, not just Indigenous people, have had examples over the years where they feel government has failed them. We're coming from within your lifetime, Joan, and I only know this because you shared with me your age before we started talking, but within your lifetime there have been policies, and I know this because my father is of a similar age to you, and he was talking the other day around the dinner table about, he's really supportive of what I'm doing, and he said, you've got to remember, he was imparting some wisdom, and he said, I grew up in the era of the White Australia policy. We've had the White Australia policy that just literally underpinned, taking people like, so my husband's non-Indigenous. So back in that time, I would have been at risk of losing my children, because children who looked like they could pass for non-Indigenous children were taken and trained up in the ways of non-Indigenous ways. So that sort of policy in your lifetime existed when my children would be at risk of being removed from me for no other reason than that there was a policy of assimilation, wanting Aboriginal children to become non-Aboriginal children effectively. So that sort of policy, the stolen generation policy, we've seen so many different alcohol policies, alcohol reduction policies, banning policies, and then all of a sudden swapping it back to, oh no, now we'll have alcohol in communities. You know, this sort of policy that is written without the consultation or without the input of the people who it's going to affect, without the knowledge on the ground, and then changing every election cycle, it creates so many issues. So it's not just that it doesn't address the issues, it creates more. So what I will say is that by including the voices, by getting the advice from the people who these policies affect and who have the lived experience, who can tell us what does and doesn't work, that is going to give us better outcomes.
Great, thank you, Jade. There's another question that we'll come to after Mary's done her presentation, and it is about that issue which a lot of people are talking about. Well, why don't all Indigenous people want the Yes campaign to work, to be successful? Why are some Indigenous people coming out to say, well, it's not going to make any difference to myself and to my people and my communities? But we'll come back to that. Just something that Jade just said before I introduce Mary is I've just been in Alice Springs, and you know, there's a whole section at the telegraph station there around the history of the stolen generation. And of course, many of you people know, Jade just gave a brilliant example. If she had have been living during that time, her children could have been taken away and she could have been taken away. But you know, the sadness for me, and I'll probably start to cry because I have a double tear gene in my family, is that, you know, some of those people never found their biological mums and dads. And by the time they found out who they were, their biological mums and dads had died. And in the museum that I was in, there were some positive examples where people did finally connect, you know, with their biological mums and dads. But my God, they'd gone through all their lives and they were now in their 60s and in their 50s when that happened. So I think that's a very good example of the things that have been done to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people regarding the stolen generation policy. So, Mary, over to you. And I'm so pleased that you're with us because we had heard that you're not well. So you must be a brave person to come and join us if you haven't been unwell. So I do hope you're feeling better. But folks, just to introduce a little bit about Mary Crooks, she's had a deep commitment to social justice over her lifetime. And she has qualifications regarding a whole lot of issues to do with social justice. I won't go through those. We'll put Mary's profile up with this webinar. But currently, she is the executive director of Victorian Women's Trust, and she was the project director of a groundbreaking project called Purple Sage Project. We've invited Mary to talk very much to us from a non-Indigenous point of view around the importance of social justice. So Mary, over to you, and I hope you're not feeling too crook. And you need to just take mute off, Mary. Mary, you need to unmute yourself.
Yep, have unmuted.
Great.
Yeah, thanks, Joan. Look, I think it was a little bout of food poisoning, so that's all right, you know. And thank you, Jade, and thank you for taking us right back to the Uluru Statement. I think I want to make two opening statements from a social justice point of view, and one is that everything that has been achieved, everything that's been developed, everything that has been built in this great continent called Australia has actually been off the back of dispossession of first occupants. And so to me, the voice is one small step in making amends. And I think really Jade talked about the 1901 Constitution. To me, this forthcoming referendum is about actually putting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples on the birth certificate. The 1901 Constitution is the birth of modern Australia. So let's put the First Nations peoples on the birth certificate for a start. I also think, having had a lot of experience in public process and consultation, that Jade absolutely nails it by saying that if the lived experience of people, for example, especially in remote communities, and the wisdom in knowing how to actually develop the pathways for the kids, how to do proper birthing practices, how to manage land, if the lived experience of Indigenous peoples is able to be taken through a mechanism like the voice up to parliaments and laws and programs, the programs and the laws are more likely to have a more efficient and a more impactful outcome on the ground. There's no question in my mind that one of the best ways of breaking through and closing the gap in this country is to take the wisdom and the lived experience that's on the ground across Indigenous Australian communities and make sure that it's properly reflected in programs and laws. To me, to be honest, it's a no-brainer, because that's been my ethos as far as why you even consult in the first place. But look, when Albanese announced the referendum as part of their pledge last May, I just had a deep ache in me to bring the kitchen table conversation model that we have developed over 20 years at the Victorian Women's Trust. I just wanted to bring it into the service of the Yes campaign. I wanted to accept the invitation that is there in the Uluru Statement for all of us Australians to, as Jade said, to start at base camp and to trek and journey together for a better world. So I got in touch and took part last October in the first collaboration laboratory up in Brisbane with From the Heart, and it was a colossal occasion. It was very thrilling. It was especially thrilling for me to be in the minority in that group of 75 people or so, in terms of recognising the wisdom from Indigenous leadership around the country at that laboratory. So that's where we struck the accord that we would bring our kitchen table conversation model into the service of the Yes campaign. And so with the advice and support of From the Heart, we've developed our campaign. It's called Together Yes. And the essence of our approach, Joan, is that our model, if I can step back a bit, actually, sorry, we've been working with this model for over 20 years. We worked with it, as you mentioned, in Victoria, way back in a project called Purple Sage, but we then applied it to the issue of water, and we did a mighty project involving thousands of ordinary folk in developing a community understanding of water reform, the kind of water reform that was needed in this country, because the process we've been developing has the ability to harness complex issues. Most famously, I think, our kitchen table model was employed when Cathy McGowan was elected as the first independent in 100 years or so in the seat of northeastern Victoria in Indi. And I effectively trained and mentored that group, Voices for Indi, in how to roll out this process of engagement across the community. And it was one of the reasons, not the only one, but it was one of the reasons why that seat was able to change, because there was a process of engagement, people re-engaged in their democracy, people being respected, people were able to come together in small groups, have safe and respectful discussion, put their concerns on the table, and enjoy a process of shared deliberation and learning. So since Indi, that was back in 2013, we've applied the model in other ways. But what we've done with the Voice campaign, with Together Yes, is we're in the process now where we're recruiting conversation hosts all around Australia, and the expectation is that each person, each man or woman who steps up to say, I'll be a conversation host, they don't actually have to have any great knowledge of our Indigenous past or connection with the Indigenous past. They simply need to be a good organiser who can bring together up to 9 or so other people in a communal space or in their own home. We do the rest. We actually provide the deliberative materials for people to have a fantastic discussion and have a real sense of connection and a more truthful relationship with the past that the Uluru Statement also talks about, a more truthful relationship with our past. And so we're recruiting conversation hosts now from all around Australia. We're asking a whole lot of corporates, for example, and faith communities and NGOs to turn this into an opportunity. Hopefully COTA New South Wales would be one such, to turn it into an opportunity for their people to become conversation hosts, to step up, put their citizen hat on and say, yeah, damn it, I'll be a host. I will bring together a small group and we'll have this safe, respectful discussion. We'll clarify the issues and hopefully we will connect in such a way that the needle is tilted to a yes vote. So Together Yes, that's our process of small group discussions all around the country. Our aim is that those small group discussions will occur in May and June. And the reason they kick off in May around Australia is because that happens to be the anniversary of the Uluru Statement, but it's also the anniversary of the 67 referendum. So there's a huge symbolism and sense of solidarity around a movement that brought home the outcome in 67 and to celebrate the anniversary of the Uluru Statement, which I think as a non-Indigenous person illustrates to me it is the most defining moment in our lifetime. So we have our conversations in May, June. I'd just be urging your membership, Joan, to go to the website, togetheryes.com.au. Everything's there for people. There'll be more in another week or so. And I just would urge you to join in this historic movement to put Indigenous Australians on the birth certificate of this nation and to start making amends for the wrongs that have been committed. We don't have to, wallow in guilt or shame and whatever, but very, very wrong things have been done to Indigenous Australians. And this is about starting to course correct. So I'd urge you to join Together Yes and join us, join me, and let's do our bit to bring the referendum home.
Great, Mary. Just thank you so much. And I knew about your model, and I've always been a great admirer of Cathy McGowan's work while she was an MP. And I know from some of my friends from Victoria, one thing that she did teach people, this is my understanding, she had heaps of volunteers from her electorate that would go to Canberra and actually see Canberra in action. And these people learnt how government processes work. And as much as we complain about the politicians of our land, unless you're actually in Canberra, and in my career, I was there for 8 years lobbying the federal government around a whole range of issues, and you see the machinery of government and how it can work for better. And it's important for us to hold on to that, because I have been very concerned, especially in the last 10 to 15 years, about the fragility of our democracy. And we have to make sure that when times change and when parties change and politicians change, that we hold on to that fundamental importance in Australia of our democracy when it's working for all. And that's what we hope this campaign will do. Mary, just one thing about the Together Yes Together Yes. When you said it's pulling, people can come together, I'd be interested in why you've said 9, which I mean, you don't need to go into detail about that, but I'm always interested in models. And did you say that someone from your group would join that conversation as well?
No.
Okay.
No, Joan, it's really just based on a long experience of mine, which is The best way, the optimal number to have a really fantastic discussion together is between 6 and 10.
Okay.
12, 15, 18, it starts to get a little bit unwieldy. So no, and when I first ran this model way back in Victoria, I had professional people would say to me, "So who's going to facilitate the discussions?" They assumed, and I said, "Ordinary folk will," because actually ordinary folk are really good at having discussions and conversations. So these groups don't need professional facilitation. So it's all about men and women agreeing. You might, Joan, for example, bring, some of your neighbours, some of your family. You might bring them together. What we do is supply you with the means by which that group discussion is conducted. So you don't have to be the fount of all knowledge. We provide you with the sort of format, the agenda. You make sure it happens. You make sure the discussion happens. We give you the ground rules at the beginning so that everybody can have a say, so that no one dominates, so that the discussion is respectful. So we give people an armchair ride. Literally, the conversation hosts make it happen.
Okay. No, I'm really, really interested in the model. So the participants out there in the cyber world, folks, what we'll do at the end of the webinar, we actually put it up on our COTA New South Wales YouTube channel so people can hear this again, but more importantly, that you recommend this to your friends and family so that they can also share in the knowledge that both Jade and Mary have wonderfully done today in the webinar. And we'll also put up links. So we'll put up a link to the Uluru Statement from the Heart. We'll put up a link from Together Yes, and we'll also put up a link to From the Heart, which we've already done because they have terrific resources. So again, the theme of this webinar is for us all to become better informed so that when we go to the referendum in October, we are as informed as we can be. Now, Jade, I'll go back to you because there are a couple of questions if you've had a bit of a look while Mary's been talking. And thanks, Mary, very much. That was great. So, how about the one from Judith? Jade, can you see that one? Judith Jackson?
No, Joan, I might need your help.
Okay.
I'm not seeing any of the
No, that's okay.
comments, but not all the questions.
Okay, so Judith says, we've been hearing, this is the one that I said before Mary started to talk with us, we've been hearing about some Indigenous people saying they do not want the referendum. And the question is, can you tell us why it would be? So the question is, many Indigenous people wanted to go ahead, yes, and other Indigenous people, including Indigenous MPs and leaders, say no, it won't do any good, or it won't make any difference. Yep.
Yeah, thank you for giving the opportunity to talk on this because there is a lot of noise at the moment, and some of that is around and we're sort of referring to the No campaign. The first point I want to make is that Indigenous people are not a homogenous group. We don't all think the same, just like people from any background don't all think the same. And we've got different ideas on how we can approach this. And this is, these aren't new conversations. We've, over many, many years, we've asked for different iterations of voices, and we've come together to try and progress Aboriginal affairs generally. So you can't ever expect people to all agree on the one thing. So I'm just going to pick out some of the main arguments that you might be hearing, and one is about whether we go for treaty first. Now, and that's, when you refer to Indigenous MPs, Joan, really the only one that comes to mind is Lydia Thorpe talking about treaty. Now, Lydia, to date, to my knowledge, has not come out with an exact position on whether she will or won't support voice to Parliament. But what she does talk about is treaty. I personally would like to get to a point in this country where we have treaties. But this step, this fundamental step of having a voice to Parliament, to me is just, it's practical. It's the right way to approach this, because we need that solid footing to be able to have those further treaty negotiations. Now, treaties are being spoken about and treaty commissions are being stood up in states and territories. We've begun the work up here. Victoria is about 10 years into it. So that's happening at that level. What we do need, though, is that overarching federal foundation to have these conversations and to coordinate all of this. And what I want everyone to know is that we're not giving up one thing for the other. So because we're on this path to voice right now, and we've been given this opportunity to go to referendum this year, that does not mean that the treaty conversation, it stops there. It's just the sequencing. For those who say this won't make any difference, I think I've given a few practical examples of where there could be impact, and I think we just keep coming back to doesn't it just make sense to everybody that if you're making policy about people, get that advice from them and make the policy with them. So, to give a voice to people who the policy and the legislation affects is going to help government make better informed decisions. So for me, that just and having been in those roles where I've needed to design policy and what have you, we talk about evidence-based decision making. Doesn't it just make sense to bring the voices in from those who are living those lives, who are living with those issues? So yeah, look, we're not all going to agree. The majority of leaders at the Constitutional Convention not only agreed, but it was the Uluru Statement was received by standing acclamation, and there's been a lot of hope and optimism that's come with it. And then we've really drilled down into what the practical changes can look like. Even in the Northern Territory at the moment, we've just gone through a whole lot of other changes around alcohol bans in communities. We had Aboriginal people, community members and peak bodies all wanting to share information. But because there was not that mechanism, we have government making those decisions without voices on the ground, and that really just needs to stop.
Thank you, Jade, and good on Judith. Look, this is the thing about Zoom. It's quite remarkable, isn't it? People are well ahead of us sitting here talking about these important issues, and Judith's just given us, the Prime Minister has just announced this is the proposed question, and this is what it will be. A proposed law to alter the Constitution to recognise the first peoples of Australia and Torres Strait Islander voice. Do you approve this proposed alteration? So that is the question. And that's good. So Jade, thank you. You've helped us, I'm sure, today with some more information so that we can actually make an informed decision when we vote. Now,
Joan,
sorry. Yeah. You go, Jade, and then Mary.
Mary and Joan. So I've just seen Judith's question, and it's just sparked a thought.
Yes.
Living in a retirement village of 400 plus people. Judith, you've got a great opportunity there to share a heap of information. And I do understand your concern about giving information from both the yes camp and the no camp. If I can, and to be shown that you're apolitical and being neutral, but can I just suggest this for a moment? If we step back from yes and no, if we can just go with what is the truth of the matter, and the truth of the matter is that we're not recognised. We need to be. We need to provide a voice to help better decision making. Like, this is the truth of it. So I don't even know that we need to do this yes no argument. We need to do the truth telling. Let's talk about what the current situation is, what hasn't worked for all of this time, and what can work now. So if I can just suggest that we take the yes no out of it, even though I'm quite obviously promoting a yes, but let's get the info out. And then I strongly believe that this nation can handle that in the voting booth. They'll hear the information, they'll know why we need to vote yes, and they will vote yes.
And Mary, what were you going to say? Thanks,
Uh,
Jade.
Yeah, look, I just want to come back on the Uluru Statement and the question about, some Indigenous voices being opposed, including the fact that, 7 delegates walked out of the Uluru Convention, leaving another 240 to keep on doing the work. But I've spent a lifetime in public process and public policy, and the process, the Indigenous-led process, designed and led, leading up to the Indigenous National Convention, is one of the best you could actually read about. It is one of the best. And what struck me as an outsider, as I say, I've spent a lifetime in this, is that 13 regional dialogues all around the country over 3 days at a time, that the formulation of the membership of those dialogues, 60% needed to be elders, 20% were people working with Indigenous organisations, and 20% individual Indigenous people. So the care to establish the cultural authority within each regional dialogue was absolutely manifest. One of the things that struck me was that the record of meetings of each of those 13 regional dialogues was never read out to the next regional dialogue. So they deliberately wanted to avoid groupthink and to respect the cultural authority of each dialogue. They were only read out one after the other for the first time at the convention. And I think it's quite striking that there was such strong support for a voice, treaty, truth, from all the regional dialogues. If we had to be honest, I don't think I've ever seen another national level process of consultation as good as what was involved in the lead up to the Uluru Statement. So I just think, as non-Indigenous Australians, we should feel very, very confident about the formulation of voice, treaty, truth.
And I think maybe with the information that we're getting at the moment, there's been so much emphasis on the voice, and the notion of voice means many things to many people. But if you put it with voice, treaty and truth, and you understand a little bit more about what those other 2 words mean, I think that gives us the whole picture. Just for people out there, we've just put a link to the Uluru Statement from the heart. And, I just, every time I hear it, and I've heard it many times, and I get so moved when I actually hear it read by Indigenous people, First Nations people, as you did today, Jade. I felt honoured to be able to hear it through you telling us and speaking the Uluru Statement from the heart. So it was a special moment for me. But I would say to everyone out there, please use that as information and read it regularly, because the more you read it, you understand the importance of what Mary just described to us that happened at that time at Uluru. And the process was remarkable. And the process came up with this statement, which is remarkable, and which we all should read and read and read until it becomes part of our heart as well. Now let's go. There's another couple of questions. Mary, I was just going to say, Mary, can you read in the chat? Can you open the chat? Because there is a special comment, I think, especially for you there.
You better tell me, I think.
Yeah, it says, I'm so delighted to be online with Mary Crooks at last. I'm sorry to have messed up. This is a registration from this woman that was going to do it together, yes, Zoom. And she just wanted to let you know, Mary, that she thinks that you were 2 of my important mentors, she's saying, Mary Crooks and Mary Sexton. And sadly now someone has deceased. So anyway, that's a special message for you,
Okay.
Mary.
Yep.
There's a few people, of course, that are telling us they're from retirement villages, which Jade just referred to, and they're having information sessions. So that model that Mary has walked us through, that would be an ideal model to have small groups in retirement villages and aged care facilities where that's appropriate. So that's good. People need to take that opportunity to do that. Let me just have another look down here. The proposal is there should be a body to be called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island. Oh, now here is a long one. This is again from Judith Jackson. So folks, have a read. Judith Jackson's on the roll here. She's telling us a little bit more information about what the representative group will look like or could look like. So that's useful as well. I'm just going back now to the Q&A section. Oh yes, now we're talking about campaigns and the tricks that people play. What will happen if Parliament doesn't implement something like the Voice wants? Will we be constantly in the High Court? That's probably a question to you, Jade. Oh, has Jade disappeared?
While you're finding Jade,
yes.
I think the quick answer to that, Joan, is
yes. Go ahead.
Look, I think the quick answer is that if there's a responsibility in the Constitution for the government of the day to take advice on programs and laws affecting Indigenous people, the fundamental question is whether they're prepared to be accountable for acting on that advice. That's what we have to keep in mind. And if they're, let's not get frightened about high court challenges or whatever. And, that's also a place in our system. But let's just concentrate on the expectation of governments being accountable. And if it looks as though they don't heed the advice through the Voice, then people look at that when they come up for election.
Yes, I agree with that. And, there's also been these comments that some politicians have made around acknowledging immigrants that have come to this country and built communities and industries and so on. I think that's sort of getting the message confused as well. Now,
and the reason that's getting that confused, the question about special treatment for Indigenous people is confused because every wave of migrants from my ancestors who came out in a boat in 1856 to Vietnamese, to Italian, to Greek, to Syrian refugees, every wave of people to this country have not been here for 60,000 years. So to me, it's a matter of recognising first occupants, trying to do the right thing in restoring a relationship or creating a more positive relationship with first occupants, and then making sure that everybody in this country is treated fairly and humanely. So to me, it's a real muddying of the waters. It's not about special treatment. It's saying, we've been here for a couple of 100 years. Are we prepared to acknowledge that we actually share this continent with the oldest living culture in the world? Yes or no? Do you want to share that? Do you want to acknowledge the primacy of that culture in terms of its longevity? Yes or no?
Now, thank you very much, Mary, for that answer and that comment. Very useful. Now, sadly, for some reason, Jade is still with us, but she has no sound. So there's something wrong with her system, which I think we're coming to a close anyway. Just let me have a look through the Q&A here. Oh yes, someone else has put forth another idea, which I think, Mary, you'd probably agree with as well. A lot of our older people are connected to an organisation called the University of the Third Age, or U3A, and Jeffrey's suggesting to everyone, if you are part of that group, this would be an ideal topic for your discussion groups. And I know the way that U3A works, you could get someone from the campaigns that are out there to come and talk to you.
Yeah, it's a great idea of Jeffrey's. He's spot on. And I spoke to 60 people at a U3A meeting the other week, and that was exactly my line, that every one of them could actually step up and become a conversation host and they know the benefits. You 3A people know the benefits of coming together and having respectful discussion.
Absolutely. Jade, are you with us? Can you hear us now? I can see you. Can you hear me? No, maybe not. Jade, unfortunately, I think something's happened. Something's happened with the sound, but at least we can still see Jade, so that's a good thing. Oh, and the other group too, Mary, which is a partner in lots of ways with Council on the Age in New South Wales, and that's the Older Women's Network. So they're called, their acronym is OWN, and they're in lots of places. And as I mentioned, I think the Omni group, there's a few men's groups, and we know that this is an important topic for everyone in our community, but sometimes there are some groups where they need to know the information and they like to hear it when they're in a safe environment with other like-minded people. So I think Omni is one of the groups, Older Men, New Ideas. There's, what's that other? Men's Sheds. You know, they're places where men get together and do things. So I think that's another good suggestion. And I'm still looking at you, Jade. Can you hear me? Hey,
I'm back now. I don't know
good.
what happened.
Terrific.
Things were going too well, I guess, and we just had to have a little hiccup.
Jade, Mary and I were just sharing ideas about different groups that can run the model that Mary talked us through, and resources that we need for that. So we're still pushing the Together Yes model, and we know that there are some people listening to us this morning that are parts of groups like Older Women's Network, University of the Third Age. Retirement villages is a good place to hold these discussion groups, aged care facilities where people are already in that sort of group setting, and they would be very useful to share the information about the campaign.
There's just, when you turn your mind to it, there's just so many opportunities. And the really exciting thing is by the end of 2023, think about how much all of our knowledge will have grown. You know, there's just so much positivity out of this. You know, we're having conversations that, you know, I would have been uncomfortable about at the beginning because I wouldn't have known how people were going to respond. And what's really encouraging for me is I'm having all these conversations and, you know, I'm looking at the comments here. People get this, you know, I think the majority of people in this nation want to have these conversations, want to increase their knowledge, and then want to share it. And I just think it's such a great thing for us as a country. The way we can now, you know, my children are growing up in this environment where they're hearing all of this, they're hearing the stories, and they're also seeing that Australia wants better for them. And that's a really lovely thing as a mum to see that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And also the importance of language not being lost. And we know there's great commitments in different states and territories where Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander languages are starting to get a bit of a boost. And I just think, you know, they're symbolic, I know, but now that we have information sessions and webinars, people are acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land where the meetings are taking place. We see it a lot on the news. We see it a lot with ABC journalists and reporters. They talk about what country they're on before they start their story. Again, symbolic, but I think really important for us to increase our knowledge. I think it's great.
And Joan, I think, you know, it's symbolic, but then there is that practical side. So when I open meetings now for work, you know, we do the acknowledgement of country, and it's a bit of a cultural thing as well. We do this thing called Who's Your Mob, and it helps to understand where you fit in and your systems of knowing. So I always talk about being a Gooreng Gooreng woman. What I've said though is for my non-Indigenous colleagues, like, I'm very interested in where they come from. I want to know about their identity and where they see themselves fitting into the world. So we all do it now. So we do an acknowledgement of country. I share that I'm a Gooreng Gooreng woman and a bit about me, and then everyone else does it too. And it's just been a great way to connect with my colleagues. And I think that this is where we need to shift to as a nation. It's not a us and them. You know, we have had to overcorrect certain things. And then I want to get to what, like, when we're all connected, we're connected to each other and to the country that we're living and working on.
Great, Jade, thank you. We've just got a few more comments coming through, and there's a beauty here around. And when your sound went, Jade, Mary was talking about this whole issue of going to the High Court. So there's a good comment there about more public conversation required around that, and it's again a little bit of scaremongering. There's been lots of congratulations coming through, so that's terrific. And we've got, oh yes, now there's already a couple of people that have decided to start their conversations, Mary, so you'll be pleased they've already signed up, so that's fantastic. And someone says here, oh, one woman, she's working on another big campaign to do with death and dying, and so she's very busy with that. So she can't do everything. We understand that people have to choose the campaigns that they're working on. But I hope today's been informative so that you can spread the word. And as I said, please remember that soon this will be going up on COTA New South Wales YouTube channel. So I would really encourage all of you out there. So we've had up to 85, no, we've had close 88, I think I last saw, number of participants. So if each of you sent that to another 3 or 4 people, that's the way that we can get the information out. I think we've had really respectful questions and comments. I hope you've thought that, Jade and Mary. We haven't had any that have come through that haven't been appropriate. So I do thank you all.
I've really appreciated that. Like I said, it helps us to understand what information needs to get out. So those questions are so helpful. When you're having your conversations, just a nice little message from the Northern Territory. I've just come back from Alice Springs. I went to the Central Land Council Ranger camp over the weekend, and what I can tell you is that language is very strong. We've been having the conversation we've had this morning. We had in about 6 different traditional languages. Not me, I had lots of help with that. And the feeling up here is great. You know, we're getting the messaging out. The voice in whatever iteration has been asked for so many different times, particularly out of the Northern Territory. We've had the Yirrkala petitions, the Barunga statement. This is where the Uluru statement was created. So mob up here, you know, and we're talking like we're having these conversations in far remote communities, sitting in the dirt and in the middle of nature, and having these conversations about how things work in Canberra. And it's really, I've learnt a lot from the elders that have, you know, fought for these things well before I was born. And, you know, it's funny, they sort of give us a bit of a ribbing for being cheeky, sort of saying, you aren't the first people to do this generation. They've been at this a really long time. So there are a number of elders at the moment who are just pushing us out there to get this done, because this really solidifies all the work they've done before. And it would be so nice for them to see this, you know, the likes of my dad, who's, you know, really had so much hope for this country, for him to be able to see that we're getting there, you know. Yes. And for him, if he could see these comments now, that would just really warm his heart.
Well, I want you to share them with him. And Jade, there's one that's just come through now, which is again from Judith, and she says she's in the Coffs Harbour area, and she says we have the first Indigenous school with language. I'm so proud of our community. So that's fantastic as well. Jade and Mary, we're coming to an end, but can I first say to you, Jade, you are amazing. You are amazing. I think we're in very, very good hands to just hear your commitment, but to hear your knowledge, and to now know that you're going to be passing that knowledge on to your children and your community. And I thank you from the bottom of our heart for just doing what you did. It was just absolutely brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And Mary, you've given us a perspective which I think is very important too. And I just hope everyone takes up your offer around the conversations that we can have with 9 people, that we can increase the knowledge out there. That's important too. And Mary, for your commitment in social justice over your lifetime, very much appreciated. So, folks, we have come to an end. Again, we're on 3 different time zones, and in Kangaroo Island now it's 11:30, which means it's 12 o'clock, which means it's the end of our webinar. Just to let everyone know, as I mentioned at the beginning of our webinar, we're having another one around more information to do with the campaign. So please stay alert to our emails that go out to people. And some people said, but what about older people who aren't hooked into emails? How do they get to understand that sort of, what we don't want to call it the yes or no campaign, but how do they get to understand all the aspects of the campaign? Well, just remember that the government have said they're going to put out this pamphlet, which will be posted to households. We haven't seen the content of that, but that will also help people. We've got the links that I've talked about. We have another webinar happening in April, which is we're going to do in partnership with the NRMA, and it's on about issues to do with older drivers. So again, Jade, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much. It was just terrific. And thank you. Yeah, no, it was wonderful. I'll be spreading the word. If anyone doesn't know about Jade Ritchie, they're going to find out about Jade Ritchie. And again, Mary, thank you very much for your intelligence, commitment, and insight. So bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
See you at the next webinar. Bye, Jade. Bye, Mary.
Thank you, Mary.
Nice to meet you.
You too. I've heard so much about you. So
well, I'd love to meet you at some point.
We'll make sure it happens.
Okay. Bye-bye then.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.